Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elaine Apter. I am from the state of Maryland League of Women Voters, also from the 8th District of Maryland, from Montgomery County. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Frederick and Montgomery County and Hood College, we welcome you to this second part of our debate, which is the debate of the Republican candidates for the 8th Congressional District. The League of Women Voters have been educating the public on candidates and issues for almost 100 years, over 95 years now, and so we're very proud of that. We do have an online interactive voters guide, vote411.org. There are cards up at the top. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Zika, who is from Frederick County League of Women Voters, and she will introduce the president of Hood College. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, candidates and audience, for coming, especially the candidates coming out on a Sunday rainy afternoon to Hood College. We welcome you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here on a rainy Sunday. It is my great pleasure to welcome you in two capacities, one as a professor of political science at Hood College, and one in my other hat is I'm a board member of the League of Women Voters of Frederick County. So I am really pleased to see you here this afternoon. And I would like to welcome to the podium the president of Hood College, Dr. Andrea Chapdelaine, who has been sort of unceasingly committed to civic engagement and involving the students in the affairs of not just the county, but of the country as well. So please help me in welcoming the president of Hood College, Dr. Andrea Chapdelaine.
Good afternoon. I know we are a little behind schedule, so I will be extremely brief. I would just simply want to say on behalf of all of us here at Hood, we are delighted to have you with us this afternoon. I want to thank the candidates for making time in their busy schedules to come and share their issues, their ideas with all of us. I'm very proud that Hood joins many colleges and universities across the country that serve as an important place for these conversations to take place. Very proud of all of our students who are the many students who are working on many of these campaigns, and there's no better way to show them the importance of civic engagement and responsible citizenship through this event today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm Robert McCartney. I'm a longtime writer for the Washington Post, and I'm your moderator for this debate. We want to thank the League of Women Voters and Hood College for sponsoring this debate. The questions have been selected by the League of Women Voters, by students at Hood College, and by me. There will be 1 minute to answer each question, and our ace time creeper, Adrian, will alert you when your time is about to expire. There's a 15-second warning and then a red, hard-to-miss stop sign held up, and if you go beyond it, I will interrupt you. I'll be polite, but I will interrupt. I did a lot of that during the Democrats' debate, which immediately preceded this. By the way, it was decided by lot that the Democrats would go first, and then the Republicans, and the order in which the candidates are speaking was also done by lot. Please speak into the mics, because otherwise nobody can hear you, and we will also be taking questions from the audience. And Diane, who's holding up the cards, will give you cards on which to write your questions and submit them to me. There will be a 1-minute closing statement at the end. We're looking to wrap up between 6:15 and 6:30. And we're not all having opening statements, but instead we're going to give you sort of an open-ended kind of opening softball, let's say, opening question, so that you can sort of lay out what you wanted to say. So, and we'll start at the far end and come forward to from left to right towards me, and then the second question will start with the next person. So we'll start with R.E.A. Shudovsky, and then next time we'll start with Shelley Skolnick, next time with Dan Cox, then Jeffrey Jones, then Elizabeth Mattori. So first question, what areas in your past work or job experience make you uniquely qualified both to represent District 8 and to be effective in the U.S. Congress? R.E.A. Shudovsky.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the League of Women Voters and Hood College. I appreciate your all coming out today. I worked as a financial analyst. I started in equity research and then moved over to more private investments. And I had spent a lot of time working with small businesses and entrepreneurs, helping them to be successful and to grow their own businesses. With that private sector experience, I went to work on Capitol Hill as an economic policy advisor to a member of the House of Representatives. And I saw firsthand how important it was to have experience in the private sector and to implement and to use that in government in order to make effective government that actually is positive for the American people. And that's exactly the experience that I intend to use as your representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, the mixture of private sector and public sector experience and understanding where the two intersect and how they can work together to be most effective for the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Shudovsky. Shelley Skolnick.
My experience has been with the private sector, starting with a company called IBM and presently with my own law firm that has 4 employees. So I've seen the variety of private sector firms. And when you're in the private sector, it's very important to make a profit, avoid a loss. In the government, what we need now with these huge deficits that are continuing for years in the future is to address the deficits. This year it's $540 billion. And the forecast is for continuing. There's no forecast for a balanced budget. I've been advocating a balanced budget in 4 years. What's interesting is I was here for the debate of the Democrats, and for those of you who are also here, not one of the Democrat candidates mentioned anything about balancing the budget, one of our most important obstacles, challenges.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I also echo my thanks to the League of Women Voters. I am a constitutional and employment attorney and a business law attorney. I have experience in the 8th District, both Frederick and Carroll and Montgomery counties, serving Democrats and Republicans and independents. I have consistently fought for constitutional liberties of individuals under life, liberty, and property. I have a small business myself, and so I strongly believe in lower taxation and expanding jobs. I have experience as an elected town official, where I have fought for immigration, absolute control and enforcement of our immigration laws, and to bring a compassionate voice to that effort. I've also stood toe-to-toe with individuals in the legislature of Maryland advocating for civil rights and for important constitutional liberties, and I know how to bridge those gaps.
Thank you, Dan Cox. Jeffrey Jones.
Yes, I grew up in Montgomery County, got married in Frederick County, went to college in Carroll County, and I've been a pastor for 40 years, which puts me in direct contact with the people of this area. I've served churches in all of them. One of the things that we've heard several times is that Congress is gridlocked and shut down, and we need someone who can work and encourage the gathering together of the great ideas and compromising in order to accomplish things. That's been my work. Counseling couples, dealing with the traumas of death, encouraging folks through the challenges of marriage and those struggles, And so I'm really kind of a professional negotiator. And this is what we need in Congress. And since the Republicans have the benefit, why not have a Republican who can work at negotiation in the House of Representatives?
Thank you, Jeffrey Jones. Elizabeth Mattori.
Thank you again for this opportunity. I love the League of Women Voters. As a woman voter myself, I probably have to pay dues. I apologize, but thank you for this opportunity. I am a millennial. I think that's the number one thing I bring to this seat. I'm one of the older ones. I'm 36, so I'm between Generation X and 2 years ahead of millennials. But every single time I've graduated from college or law school or even business school, I've graduated into an economic downturn. 2002, when I was at Columbia, was September 11th. 2006, my classmates from law school were the first ones to lose their jobs, and they're still doing doc review 10 years after. I went to business school specifically to address this issue. I thought that our government, I didn't know that I was going to be running for Congress to address that, but I went to business school to make sure that at least our generation could get it right. So that's what I want to offer to you in District 8. I've done several jobs here and there. You know, I worked in advancement. I worked to create a public charter school in DC, and we'll talk about more of my experience later. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth Mattori. So the first question on an issue has to do with immigration. And this is a sort of a long question, so I'm going to ask Adrian to give them each 2 minutes for this one. So you got 2 minutes for this one. As you know, immigration has figured prominently in the Republican presidential race. And there have been proposals to spend $10 to $12 billion to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border in order to reduce illegal immigration. There's been proposals to detain and deport the approximately 11 million immigrants who are residing illegally within the United States. So in light of the attention that issue has gotten within your party, what would your answers be to immigration? What would you be pushing for? And how do you see how this debate's playing out at the presidential level? And we'll start with Shelley Skolnick.
Right, thank you. As far as the wall, I'm against the wall that Mr. Trump is advocating. It reminds me of the Maginot Line that the French had before World War II. I just think a wall would be ineffective and a waste of money.
Excuse me, will you please speak more into the microphone? People can't hear. I'm
Okay.
afraid.
Again, I'm against the wall. It would be like the Maginot Line. I just don't think it would be effective and a waste of money. Regarding the 11 million undocumented, in a prior forum, I indicated that I would support the Gang of 8 in the U.S. Senate proposal. It had a number of conditions for the 11 million. The only change that I would have is that if there would not be a path to citizenship, there would be a path to a green card, except for circumstances like working in the military. If someone was in the military, then they could also be eligible for citizenship. The other day we had a forum, and immigration was brought up also. And my position on the issue is that I think we ought to redirect our attention from the normal immigration to the refugee crisis that's facing the world. There are, according to the reports, there are more refugees throughout the world now than any time since World War II. And it's just heartbreaking when you see some of the pictures in the press. And the U.S. government is offering to take 10,000 Syrians. 10,000 out of like 12 million displaced Syrians. I mean, it's just absurd. We ought to be doing more on immigration in the next few years. In view of the crisis, the international refugee crisis, I would focus on helping refugees, a reasonable amount coming to the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Dan Cox.
Well, I've actually had to deal with this somewhat personally. As a elected town council official, we had a growing heroin problem, and that problem is affecting the 8th District. It's affecting Republican conservatives. It's affecting moderates. It's affecting Democrats. People are losing their children across party lines. I would work and I would support the border in terms of building a wall, but let me tell you something about that. My son has served in the Civil Air Patrol, and so have I with him as a captain. And we had a border agent come and tell us that their hands have been tied in many respects. They're not receiving the funding that they need. When the drug cartels and such come over the border, they're told to stand down. They're not allowed to take the low-flying aircraft. Those aircrafts come, they dip in and out, they drop their heroin, and they go. And at the same time, there's a flood of people coming over the border. These things can be dealt with through proper and lawful means. I am for immigration, and I'm for it with applying the law. I've actually represented individuals in the immigration process. I know there already is a path to citizenship. It's called follow the law. And then in terms of the question regarding deportation, you know, President Clinton deported, I believe, more than 11 million. If they're here illegally, they need to come in lawfully. My brother-in-law is a legal citizen of the United States from Mexico. So I think if we follow the laws, we can build unity, and I can reach across the party lines because the heroin addiction issue is killing all of us, and we need to stop that. Thank you.
So just to make sure I'm clear, Mr. Kexler, you would support deporting the people who are here illegally or not?
I would if they're here illegally.
Okay.
Now, there's an exception to that in the law, and that is if they're here illegally because of a need for asylum, they can prove that through a legal process.
Sure,
I've actually represented individuals in the asylum process. It's very easy. Well, it's complex, but it can be done.
That's
there.
fine. That's fine. I just wanted to
Thank
clarify exactly what your position was on that. Mr. Jones, Jeffrey Jones.
Yes. I'm really sorry that we had to have a conversation about building a wall. This country is all immigrants. Every single one of us, including the American Indians who came across the land bridge from Asia 4,500, 45,000, 450,000 years ago. There's a debate among the scientists about when that happened. But we're all immigrants. And that's what's made this country great. We have all come at some point or other because of the trouble or the difficulty we've had at home. And we need to remember that the way to find a solution is to identify personally with what the challenge is, what the obligations are, what the resources are. Yes, we need to find a path that will allow it to work appropriately. Following the law is extremely important. But we seem to forget that all of our ancestors came here at some point as immigrants. And if we're going to have a great nation which has built up its resources and strength in business, in science, in every way possible, because there are a difference of contributions to the process and the progress we've made in this country based on the fact that immigrants bring different perspectives that has always led to an improved economy and a situation. And as our Statue of Liberty says, give me your poor, you're tired, you're seeking asylum. We need to continue that and provide as much legal help to make it work as we possibly can.
Would you favor building the wall, and would you favor deporting the millions who are here illegally now?
I do not favor building the wall at all, and I think the deportation of those who have committed crimes is about it for deportation.
But not just being here illegally.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth Mattori?
Yeah, so Reverend Jones, the Mattoris didn't come here voluntarily. We came here through slavery. I just want to make sure you understand that not everybody was here voluntarily. And please, you've been saying that for the last 3 weeks. I hope you understand that that's the world that we do live in. So my mom's a Filipino immigrant. She came over in the 60s, fully educated. All her siblings came over legally and from the Philippines. They're all citizens. Half of them have served our country in military. But it also takes now 24 years to come from the Philippines now. So that's just an example of how we've had to fix our laws for that many years. Obviously, we need to fix our laws, but I also think that people are taking advantage of us not addressing it, Congress specifically. And then people who are here feel as if the people who are taking advantage of the laws are also taking advantage of us. And that tension and that stress that people aren't willing to speak up and speak out about in a very neutral, respectful way is the reason why we have exacerbated this issue. I remember when I think it was 9 years old, seeing the Berlin Wall fall. When I think about walls, that's what I think of. I mean, I was 9, I didn't know very much of what was going on, but that was a huge image, you know, tear down that wall, Reagan, you know, and I think that the Pope said it right. I mean, we have to, you know, address the issues on the fleeing and the entry. We do need resources, I agree with that, but we can't address the resources until we actually bring a more conservative approach to how we govern this country. So I'm not for a wall, and then the deportation thing's crazy. I mean, I think it's just too messy for me to say yes or no.
So you're not committed at this point on the deportation?
I cannot commit to that because most of the people who live in and around downtown Silver Spring and Wheaton, and you know, we have a huge Salvadorian community that some people are here legally and some people aren't. So that's the nature of our district, where we have to be able to focus on the issues, the problems, and how to fix it.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth Mattori. REA Shudovsky.
Well, I mean, I think adding to the list of things that have been mentioned here that we need to remember, first of all, we have fairly effective immigration laws that exist on the books today. The problem is implementation, and particularly over the course of the last 7 years, we've seen a failure of our government to effectively implement laws that actually exist in law today. So that happens to be a large problem. It's been mentioned here as well that one of the things that is also broken is the legal immigration system, right? The fact that it takes so long and costs so much money. As we've mentioned here, this country has been built by immigrants, and so to think that we no longer need people who can come in and offer their own expertise and services and add to our society is a little bit crazy. But the fact is that we do need to realize that illegal immigrants are a real issue. We talked about entry and exit systems. We don't know who's here and who's not, and who should be here and who shouldn't be here. And we've lost a way of effectively tracking people in this country. We also need to realize that it's not necessarily realistic to say, well, there are 11 million, 12 million people who are here illegally. We can simply pick them up and ship them elsewhere. In a world where we could even identify who all of those people were, we couldn't necessarily even pick them up and ship them out. People who are in the system, people who have committed crimes on top of entering the country illegally or staying here illegally certainly shouldn't be allowed to stay any longer. But simply to identify who those people are and who the people are who are here illegally and who are part of society is an almost impossible task. And I think that we've watched as Congress has failed to address how to actually do that. The Gang of 8 bill, which has been mentioned as well, like many things in Congress, is a knee-jerk reaction, and it doesn't necessarily address the actual catalysts of the problem or actually how to effectively fix what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Shudovsky. So the next question is about health care, and we'll be beginning with Mr. Cox. You know, if the Republicans win the presidency, then based on what we've seen, the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, will be either completely repealed or at least parts of it would be drastically changed. So what would you favor? Would you favor repealing all of it? And if so, what would you replace it with, or part of it? And in which case, what would you replace it with? Mr. Cox. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're back to 1 minute. This is an easy one, you know, so 1 minute should be plenty.
I favor repealing all of it, and I would replace it with freedom. Let me tell you something. As a dad and husband with 8 kids, I can't afford health care in the context of Obamacare, and I'll tell you why. The premiums for me are outrageous, and the deductible is so high. This is not just my problem. This is the Democrat problem. This is a Republican problem. This is a moderate problem. We've got to repeal it as it stands. I would be for freedom in the across-the-board marketing. So right now, I can't buy health insurance from outside of Maryland unless it's coming through an approved process in Maryland. I think we should open up the market, because that will drive the prices down on what we can afford. There are programs, for instance, in Ohio that I have looked at that I would love to buy. Illinois, some of these other states have some great programs, but I'm not allowed to buy them. That's got to change, and I would work hard to be fair. I think we need to have portability, and I think that those are some good things.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Jeffrey Jones.
I think the Affordable Care Act has provided some needed health care for millions of people who wouldn't have had it otherwise. That doesn't guarantee that it's a perfect plan. And we're going to have to continue to work, and bipartisan particularly, to find ways to make sure that health care is provided. We have health is the basis of being able to learn in school. Health is the basis of being able to get a job and to keep it. Good health is going to be the basis of our being able to live in retirement in an appropriate fashion. And so we need to find a way that we can continue to provide health care in a reasonable form. So I would not vote to dismantle it, but I would certainly want to continue to work on ways that we are able to include the families that can't afford it and to reach those who are in need of a better plan.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Elizabeth Mattori.
So my family's industry is healthcare, and both my parents are physicians, and my father, rest his soul, worked for 40 years, I think, 45 years, with the National Medical Association. So I grew up, going to conferences every year and listening to how before anything was thought of with the ACA, how we can address the health disparity, particularly with African Americans and people in rural communities. That was my dad's life mission, and that's what he tried to do before he passed away in 2009. So to watch the ACA and how it was created, I was really sensitive to it, even as a layperson. And I saw, this is really an insurance company care system, not a person care system. The Democrats sadly kind of follow President Obama like a Pied Piper type effect, where he can't do or say anything wrong. And I will argue, I will be one of those people to speak up to that truth and move to fix it or abolish it if we have to. I don't know.
Thank you, Elizabeth Mattori. Aryeh Shudovsky.
And I think this is a perfect example of how Washington is broken. Working as a staffer on Capitol Hill, I watched as members of Congress on the Republican side, who were in the majority, were paralyzed by this bill because there's so much rhetoric surrounding repealing Obamacare. And so to actually go in and try to fix some of the problems that existed, realizing that the president was never going to allow a repeal bill to get across his desk, would have actually addressed the issues facing the American people. And instead, members of Congress decided that this wasn't something that we were going to touch because it looked bad on your record or it could be used against you in the next election. There are things that are severely damaging to the marketplace and to everyday people in this bill. Premiums are through the roof, and you watch as people struggle just to make ends meet, just to be able to afford health care. There are serious reforms that we need to take, but the fact of the matter is we also need to realize the reality that a bill that's been passed into law that has touched so many different pieces of the federal government can't realistically simply be yanked out, but it can be fixed.
Thank you, Mr. Shudovsky. Shelley Skolnick, excuse me.
Right. To make health care affordable, I've proposed an expansion of Medicare Part A for all U.S. citizens. Part A, it's not like Bernie Sanders, because he wants all Medicare. Part A is the hospitalization part, okay? So in over a 4-year transition, the first year you would lower Medicare Part A to age 60. Right now it's 65. Year 2 to age 50. Year 3 to age 30. Year 4, everyone else. Be paid for by a value-added tax. So you take that expensive care, hospital care, move it out payable under a value-added tax, and then the private insurance industry will have affordable insurance for other types of care, for example, doctors and prescription drugs. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skolnick. So the next question has to do with foreign policy. It's about Asia, and we'll be starting with Jeffrey Jones. Asia, and this is a question, by the way, that was submitted from the audience. Asia is emerging as a major potential trouble spot in the international arena. We have China's military buildup and concerns about its ambitions in the South China Sea. We have North Korea's nuclear program. What should the U.S. role and approach be regarding these potential threats in Asia? Mr. Jones.
We need to remember that we are a global society. We do have connections and responsibilities, and a stronger world means a better place for us to live. But I also want to emphasize, as I've said before, the power of negotiation and the ability to sit down and talk to find solutions to the challenges is always better than going off with a big stick and pounding people. We need a strong security and military in order to provide the strength not to be bullied. But we need to remember we are talking about the people who also live on this planet, and we need to find ways to negotiate and to find the place to find a middle ground so that the hostilities that they are expressing in our direction can be redirected.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Matori.
So as I mentioned before, my mom's Filipino, so the Philippines and that area and that region is always going to be important to me. Her father, my grandfather, was a part of the Bataan Death March. He was also a part of the Filipino and American armies. My brother is serving currently in the Marines. So whatever's going to happen is going to affect my brother in somehow. So I want to make sure, and also my other homeland. So I want to make sure that we do it right. I think an example of how our, I don't want to say enemies or foes or people that aren't on our side are taking advantage of us, again, because we're distracting. You know, all these like things that we're dividing within us and it's showing our weakness. And we have to be firm but fair and mindful of the fact that we have a great place in our world to show bullies that we won't stand for such bullish actions.
Thank you, Ms. Matori. Arieh Shadovsky.
Well, without suggesting that China, North Korea, and any other country around the world doesn't have a right to have their own ambitions and goals, the situation that we face today is a failure of leadership. The United States is the last remaining superpower in the world, and we have an obligation to promote and protect freedom and democracy. And it takes many different forms. It's not necessarily nation building, which we've seen as a failure over the last 15 years, but it's diplomacy, it's weaponry, it's aid, it's military advisory, and in some situations it is boots on the ground. But we always need to remember that it's our role to lead from the front. And so we need to recognize that what's happening in China, the dangers in the South China Sea, North Korea testing missiles, Iran testing missiles, that we have an obligation to the rest of the people in this world to ensure that the United States is paying attention and is actually acting as a buffer between whatever dangers lie out there, because those dangers, as we've seen from the Middle East in particular, have a very easy way of hitting our shores.
Thank you, Mr. Shadovsky. Shelley Skolnick.
The problem in Asia is due to the economic power of China. In the last 10, 15 years, they've become a powerhouse. In our balance of payments and trade, we have a negative balance of like $500 billion a year with China. I believe that the U.S. government should have negotiations with China to rectify that trade imbalance and some of the other improper actions that China is taking. Earlier, in the other debate, they talked about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 12 countries in Asia, not one of them is China. I think we are directing our attention to the wrong issue. The issue should be improving the trade relationship with China, use that as an incentive to curb their aggressive behavior and their aggressive support of North Korea.
Excuse me, how would you do that? How would you encourage, how would you rectify the trade balance with China?
Okay. One is their currency manipulation. Another is the intellectual property. There's the hacking.
Yeah, but what leverage do we have with them on that?
Well, we are a big customer of theirs. If we start imposing restrictions on, in other words, the trade imbalance is in their favor. If we start imposing reasonable restrictions, fair restrictions, and their trade goes down significantly, they'll respond.
Okay. So trade restrictions. Okay, Mr. Cox.
Well, I agree. It's a problem of a lack of U.S. leadership in the world. I think China saw what took place with the very negative outcomes from the Iran deal, and they have taken further steps to build facilities in the South China Sea. They're simply exerting their military strength and taking advantage of us. I think we need to reverse that through a strong U.S. foreign policy leadership approach. I think we need to also engage through some of the trade opportunities to create a more balanced trade interaction. I think we need to crack down on the rule of law being violated by China, violating our patents and creating pretty much a disfavored trade atmosphere and taking advantage of us. And I think we can do that with some strong U.S. foreign policy and trade leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. So the next question is sort of a general philosophical question about your approach, the way you would go about approaching your relations with party leadership in Congress versus your own personal convictions. This question was considered to be the most important question submitted by the League of Women Voters. So the question is, and we'll start with Ms. Mattori, would you support a bill in Congress even if the rest of your party, or say your party leadership, were against it? And what would you do in that case to gather support from your colleagues to go up against your party leadership?
Thank you for that question. I think first and foremost, having me as a Republican in Congress would be the #1 step to that answer. As we know, our leadership has changed in the last year, and as Speaker Ryan is doing a bang-up job, I think, of really trying to cut through as much of the malaise as we've had in the last 8 years. But at the same time, we need new people in Congress. Congress is not going anywhere. It's going to be in the hands of the Republican Party, and I think that we here in District 8 can take advantage of that. That's the issue when you vote for the Dems. Any of the Dems will not be at the table. So I want to make sure that we have a voice at the table, but not only that, bringing that social justice, equity mindset in play by, at the same time, respecting our conservative values.
Thank you, Ms. Mattori. R.A. Shadovsky.
Actually worked for a member of Congress during his freshman term. We saw 2 bills that he had introduced getting passed into law and signed by the president. And less than a year later, he was actually thrown off of his committee for not following the rules. So I've had personal experience with what that means. I've seen what it means to deal with leadership and at the same time balance the needs of your constituency. And unfortunately, most representatives in Congress are more worried about ensuring that they're reelected by ensuring that they have the support of their leadership as opposed to the voters back home. And they figure that if they have the opportunity to get enough money from leadership PACs and other sources, they'll be fine back home. So I've seen how that actually works firsthand, and I've watched a member of Congress battle with the need to represent his constituency as opposed to leadership and their wants and needs. And I've seen how significant it is to ensure that you're putting the constituency first. And the truth is, whether or not that means you get reelected 2 years later, because you're being elected to Congress in order to represent the people back home, and that's exactly who you should be fighting for.
Thank you, Mr. Shadovsky. Shelley Skolnick.
As a moderate, I would hope that my bill would not be that far removed from the bill proposed or opposed by the leadership, so that there wouldn't be a big gap. I'd also emphasize with the leadership that if I or any of us are elected to represent this district, that it could be a precedent for electing other moderate Republicans in these types of districts, so that we would have that as an incentive for the leadership to say, try and help us, because we could then show in other states that moderate Republicans can win and even enlarge the majority in the House.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Dan Cox.
Well, first of all, I would pledge to work across party lines, but within the Republican Party, I would very strongly build alliances with the leadership, while at the same time I pledge to you to caucus with the Freedom Caucus. And if you are aware of the Freedom Caucus, they have at times butted heads with the Republican leadership and many times joined with other members of Congress not from their party to do what is right for the people. My office, if you elect me as your congressman, would be open to everyone, and I would advocate, like I have in my law practice, with a zeal and a personal touch to it, to bring your issues to bear. And I would do that through convincing and meeting with leadership to say, you know what, if there's a difference of opinion here, let's iron out what those issues are. Let's make the appropriate amendments to the legislation to fix it. And if at the end of the day they're not willing to go along with the people of the 8th District, I vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Jeffrey Jones.
The question is about being willing to go with or be forced to join the party leadership. My upbringing brought me to John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage and the importance of being able to stand firm for what you truly believe. One of the things you have to be assured of is, as a pastor, the strength of ethics and priority are extremely strong in every part of my fiber of my being. So you're going to receive someone who will stand by what the priorities and the dignity of the persons in the district and what is right and fair. Abraham Lincoln, a part of our party, showed us how to work together. His leadership council and his cabinet were those who were often enemies of his in the political world. But he taught us how to negotiate, how to listen, and how to benefit from the strengths of the others. And I bring that to Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So now we'll have, I think we'll have time for one more question, and then we'll go to the closing statements, okay? So this is a very specific question. It was submitted, I'm not sure if this came from the League or from Hood College, but it was a very specific question about how to care for the elderly. It's known that the number of elderly in the United States will increase rapidly over the next 25 years. In Frederick County, it is expected that the number of persons over 65 will double by the year 2020. So millions of Americans will need long-term care services sometime in their lifetime, but neither Medicare nor Medicaid covers the costs of assisted living, and most do not have insurance for this. To even obtain Medicaid coverage for nursing home care, seniors must essentially bankrupt themselves. So what are your thoughts about how the nation should address this need for long-term care for a exploding number of the elderly? And this would be Mr. Shadovsky.
Well, I think people have an easy time saying that the Republicans are the party of no, and we're not interested in providing any money for the poor, for the elderly, for anyone who is in need. And the fact is that one of the most significant things that our federal government actually does is provide for people who can't provide for themselves. And we've watched as Medicare and Medicaid have evolved over time since their creation to allow for new realities that we're facing. While we're focused on things like Obamacare and expanding health care for every American, we're ignoring the fact that there is a population who we already provide health care for that are falling through the cracks because people are living longer, people have different needs, medical technology is advancing, and so the needs, people's needs have grown while our obligation has remained the same. And so we absolutely need to focus on ensuring that anywhere that seniors or anyone else who the federal government should be providing for is falling through the cracks, that we grow those programs in order to ensure that that's not happening.
Thank you, Mr. Shadovsky. Shelley Skolnick.
Very timely. I'm an elder law attorney, and today, before coming here, I visited a client in a nursing home. In nursing homes, long-term care for most residents is covered by Medicaid. Very few people can afford a nursing home. It's usually $6,000 to $8,000 a month. Very expensive. So like I said, it's about 60%. Now there is a Medicaid waiver program where if you're in a nursing home, you can go to like an assisted living if you could live there safely. But it's a huge cost driver. In other words, Bernie Sanders often talks about people living on Social Security, $12,000 a year, and that might be true. But if they're in the nursing home, the federal government is probably spending $60,000 or $70,000 a year on their care at a nursing home. I would like to see more research. I've seen some new nursing homes that are on one level, and I think that they could be more efficient as far as the staffing and the cost of operating a nursing home. But that is a huge cost that I think the federal government should do research to be able to reduce the cost of nursing homes.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Dan Cox.
Yes, I would restore the Medicare Advantage program, which has been eliminated and is a problem with the Obamacare issue. I would also work to reduce real property taxes so that people in Maryland in the 8th District can have tax credits and less taxation, so they have that money freed up for the family use. I would work to eliminate the death tax. Maryland taxes you approximately 4 times when you die. Florida taxes you none. So this is a problem. I think we can work very hard together across the aisle to work on those issues. I've also done elder law, and I see one of the main problems with both my granddad and both grandfathers who are veterans, that we have got to clean up the VA. We have got to make the VA work for our veterans. So that's part of the plan that I would pursue, and I would have an open door to all the elderly.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Before we go to Mr. Jones, our organizers informed me that they think we have time for one more question before we go to the closing statement. So there will be one more question. Mr. Jones.
Okay. My father is 96. My stepmom and my mother-in-law are both suffering and have suffered and died from dementia, so I've been personally involved. One of the challenges that we face in this nation is that we're always looking to Congress or the government to fix our problems, and that's truly a part or a portion of what needs to be done. One of the things that we can encourage is by adjusting, as Dan mentioned, taxation, so that people can live together. In order to, two elderly folks who are both in fairly good health, but the cost of a 2-story, 3-story house, encourage that kind of sharing and resourcing that we maybe not have thought of before, that provide a place for people to keep members of their family in their homes, or to find folks who can live in the same place in order to help with the costs and the care, and to look at the variety of ways to make that possible.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Elizabeth Mattori.
Thank you. So my dad was 80 when he passed, so it's an odd thing. I was the youngest of 5, so my dad, I guess, was older my whole life, which is one of those things. That's why I think conservatives are really big on budget and spending. Our role and what we want to do in government is to make sure that we can afford to help the most vulnerable. And where we are now, I would argue, is an example of the 50 years of failed liberal policies. We've seen our federal government, ramp up and become extremely bloated, and so we can't even afford the things that we actually need to focus on. And if we know that the previous generation is, growing at a rapid pace, I would argue to allow some of the millennials to take charge and help fix the problem now.
Thank you, Ms. Mattori. So one more question, as I said, before we go to the closing statements. And this one was submitted by the audience, and it has to do with policy on drugs, on illegal drugs, and drug addiction. And the question is, do you see drug addiction as a criminal justice issue or a health issue, and why? So this would be Mr. Skolnick, we start.
I see it as a health issue, although it unfortunately has also become very criminal. But it's not just the illegal drugs, it's the legal drugs, the abuse of legal drugs, especially the painkiller drugs, that are getting people hooked on drugs, and then they go for the illegal drugs because they're cheaper than the legal drugs. So I think we just have to concentrate more on monitoring the prescriptions of drugs in the first place. It just seems to me that there's just too much of that in certain areas, certain doctors. Also, I think with marijuana being so widespread, I've advocated that we legalize marijuana as far as the federal government, let the states regulate it, tax it. Don't promote it, don't let advertising, but it seems to me when millions of people want marijuana that we just try and permit it and tax it.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Dan Cox.
It is clearly a criminal justice and health issue, and let me explain. As an attorney, I've represented, I've had the opportunity to work in seeing the results and the pain and the problems that come with violent drug crimes. So whenever you have a drug crime that involves violence, that is a criminal justice issue. And that includes trafficking large amounts of cocaine and heroin. It is a major problem. Kids are dying in my county and across the 8th District. In the small little town of Catoctin, I believe the football coach told me more than 7 or 9 students died in the last 2 years from heroin overdose. We have got to stop the drug problem. But the health issue, yes. I've actually had the opportunity to see individuals in the criminal process come out of that and go into health programs, and it helped them. So I would support the CARA Act pending before the Senate that diverts those funds to help as a health issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Jones.
Drug issues reflect the variety of challenges, some of them related to the family system, some of it related to a lack of opportunities for progress, for education, for the right kind of work. And it provides opportunities for others to find it as a lucrative business by selling them. So we have to look at a multiple approach to this solving the problem. A health issue is clearly a part of what drives some of the folks to misuse the drugs, and so we have to provide the resources and funding and the opportunity to study that which causes people to become dependent. We have to do a better job of strengthening our communities so our neighbors know each other, because that's one of the ways in which we provide care, preventive care, before it gets to the point where drug dependency, et cetera. So often we want to find ways to short circuit or provide someone else doing it. And I think that one of the things that we need is a fresh voice that says, let's find even a local answer by being better neighbors and a closer community.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Mattori.
So I love the fact that we're finally talking about illegal drugs, because we've had a problem for the last 40 years, especially in our urban environments, and unfortunately now that it's affecting more people, particularly in rural areas, now we're paying attention to it. We've always had a crack epidemic, we always had a heroin epidemic, and unfortunately I saw my first Special K zombie last year when I was working on the Berry campaign. It's a health issue that has become criminalized that ultimately is an economic problem. When you take away every single resource, whether it's young people wanting to work after they graduate from high school or college, whether it's here, whether it's abroad, when you take away that hope, they're desperate. Unfortunately, my third ex-boyfriend was a heroin addict, and so unfortunately, Mom didn't know that. You know, I've seen it firsthand, and so, you know, what is the federal government's role? There is a role, but as I agree with the Reverend, it's our role as a community and a society to do what we can.
Pardon my ignorance. What's a Special K zombie?
You know, the synthetic marijuana that's out now.
Oh.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that's the drug of choice these days. Crack is kind of, they're gonna say whack now. So people are using synthetic marijuana, and so what happens is, it's fake. So it's oddly to say that when you're on regular marijuana, it's a natural substance, but because it's been technically decriminalized in DC, but only for people who are homeowners. When you're a renter, you still are obligated to not pursue it, so they go to Special K, and it is a disastrous drug that I've seen firsthand, and people are doing it because they don't have anything else to do because they don't have a job.
Thank you, Ms. Mattori. Mr. Shadovsky.
Well, I think clearly this is both a health and a criminal justice issue, as has been mentioned. You know, if you're looking at a violent criminal act by someone who is addicted to drugs, then it needs to be dealt with in the criminal justice system. But I think the way that you change it is not necessarily how you classify, but rather how you actually address the individual one at a time. And so if you're looking at someone who is a drug addict and has found guilty of some violent criminal act, it's not so simple to say, let's just put them in jail, because jail has become an incubator for more crime. And so I think that's the point at which you can start to address the situation and say, this has a health piece to it as well as a criminal justice piece to it. And whether that's creating some sort of healthcare facilities that are lockdowns like prisons or some other means, that's the point at which we can actually start to address the intersection between the criminal justice and the health, and actually treat these people who have committed crimes and try to put them back rehabilitated on the streets.
Thank you, Mr. Shadovsky. Okay, so now we're going to go to 1-minute closing statements. But before we do, I want to compliment the Republican candidates who were much better about respecting the time limits than the Democrats. So hats off to you. And Adrian, our timekeeper, appreciates it also. And the audience as well. So 1-minute closing statements, starting with Mr. Cox.
Well, I'm asking for your vote on April 26th. If you go to early voting, it's April 14th. I believe that I am the conservative in the race that can bring a voice of reason across the aisle to our brothers and sisters in Montgomery County. We've been gerrymandered into this district. It wasn't our choice. I woke up one day and found myself in the 8th District, and Congressman Van Hollen then became my congressman. This is an opportunity to take our message to Washington, to build the bridge. And let me tell you one little thought about this. we're going to have a conservative and a Republican Congress. So if you care about stopping heroin, if you care about the illegal immigration issue, if you care about the transportation issues, the one way to do that is to elect someone who can caucus with the Freedom Caucus, which can stand up to the establishment when it's necessary, but also build those bridges and work with those individuals. I have the experience to do it. My office would be open to everyone. I'm a Frederick County native, and I'd ask for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Jeffrey Jones.
There's a real opportunity to put an outsider back in Congress. It's a real opportunity for you to put someone who truly understands and represents your hopes, your dreams, your experience of life. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. Sorry. I've been a person who has served the community by being there for people in every situation and walk of life. My great-great-great-grandfather in 1816 was a representative to Congress when the flag started to grow by adding a stripe and a star every time a new state joined the Union. By 1816, there were 19 stripes and 19 stars, and it began to look like a quilt. So my great-grandfather wrote the legislation that said, let's go back to honoring the 13 stripes and just add a new star every time a new state is joined. I want to restore some of that recognition of the original and leave room in a blue sky for the new. Thank you. And I approve this message.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Elizabeth Mattori.
So we all have to be honest. I'm the only one who can win this seat. Quite frankly, we can take it back for both Connie and Roscoe. I just want to let you know the Democrats are, the top people are not only multimillionaires, but they represent crony capitalism. Kathleen Matthews works for Marriott. Marriott is now one of the largest, if not will be the largest, brand in hotels. My favorite class in law school was antitrust, and just like our Republican Party did before, we need to step up when we see our capitalist society, which we appreciate, become corrupt. Basically, we are allowing, with this district, that I took myself out of the Democratic Party because of the malarkey that they caused. I became an independent because I refused to do that. And as a Republican, you know for a fact I'm the only one who can win this seat, but I need your support. I love the Republicans, but let's be honest, nobody can beat the Democrats except for me.
Thank you, Ms. Mattori. Aryeh Shadovsky.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters again and Hood College. Appreciate putting today together. We have a tremendous opportunity to actually take this seat back for Republicans and to send someone to Washington who speaks for us and fights for our needs. And to actually, this is our opportunity to have leadership in Washington who can grow the economy, who can deal with our national security concerns head on, who can address out of control spending and taxes, and who can improve education to ensure that the next generation is able to contribute and eventually is able to take over. My wife and I are raising our 3 young children here in Silver Spring, including a 7-week-old who was born during the blizzard. And the reason I'm running for Congress is looking at my kids and wanting to ensure that they have the same opportunities when they grow up and go out into the world that I had and that the generation before me had. And I think that we've lost sight of that as a country, and we need to put that back together again. This is our opportunity to ensure that we're being represented and we're being fought for. And as your representative in Congress, that is exactly what I intend to do. Thank you all so much for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Shadovsky. And to wrap it up for us, Shelley Skolnick.
I believe that Congress should tax fairly and spend wisely. In today's Washington Post, I don't know if you saw the article about the Purple Line, which is a $5 billion project, public-private partnership. Very interesting. The contract is like 800 pages. But in the Post, in today's Post, they had this formula that a scientist would not understand. It is a very complex, elaborate formula. I am amazed that the state, and this is the formula for paying the private contractor, it's this type of excessive, complicated contracting on a major project where they're asking for $900 million from the federal government. If I'm elected, or if I win the nomination, I would raise that as an issue. In other words, we cannot allow such wasteful spending unless the public and the government can completely understand these massive contracts. I urge you all to look at today's Washington Post about the Purple Line.
Thank you very much. And now Elaine Apter of the League of Women Voters will wrap things up.
Okay, very quickly, I'd like to thank all the candidates for your participation. Mr. McCartney, what a wonderful moderator. The people, the volunteers from Hood College and from the League of Women Voters, and one we forgot to mention, Melanie Cox from the Frederick League of Women Voters, who did so much to put all this together. So we thank you. It was a joint effort, and I think we did very well. And all as we ask you now, we don't tell you who to go out and vote for, but please go out and vote for whoever the candidate of your choice. A lot of people cannot vote. Others fought very hard for this vote, and it's up to you to go out there and vote. So take care all. Good evening, and thank you again.